Hey guys, this is Devin here from the Baltimore Investors, and today I wanted to go ahead and talk to you guys about a question that my parents actually brought up. My parents were traveling with me throughout Baltimore City. I was showing them the area and the places that I invest, and we had to go through a lot of the harsher areas of Baltimore that have a lot of rundown buildings, a lot of vacants, and there's actually a lot of these. In fact, there's quite more than many people even think. Most of the city happens to have populations of these vacants and rundown buildings. I mean, roofs collapsed in, just completely destroyed structures, just block after block. And they had a question where they were like, why don't investors go ahead and just take over these blocks? The houses must be cheap, right? And this is true. The houses in these type of areas are actually very, very cheap. You can often find them for as little as $1 in some cases, basically free. But even if it's not that, oftentimes in auctions, you'll see them starting at $5,000 and they'll go up from there, but won't go too far. Usually you can pick them up for like $15,000, $10,000. You could almost buy these houses on a credit card, just with a normal limit. So a lot of them are extremely cheap, and you might think, okay, if you can get a house for that cheap, then just put in the renovation cost and then, sell it, or, do it, refi, hold it, and there you go. You got a bunch of cheap houses and it allows you to just run through them really, really fast. Well, unfortunately, the truth of that that I've found anyway from my experience in going through this investing journey is that really doesn't actually work. So there's three reasons that I'm going to present today. Now, that for why these houses remain vacant, for why investors don't tend to touch them if they're just like rows of vacant houses and rows of dilapidated buildings. So the number one reason, or one of the main three reasons, is that the liens on these properties are a lot more than what the house is even worth, even after you renovate it. So a lot of these houses have people whom couldn't afford their bills. They couldn't afford their water bills. If you guys don't know, for unpaid water bills, you can actually lose your house. The city can kind of take it, but they keep stacking these liens against your house. And unfortunately, it gets to a point where they just can't pay it anymore. There can be a lot of other things, mortgages that they stop paying and such like that. But essentially, it goes into this position where the city owns the house. I mean, it doesn't own the house, but they have the house with so many liens on it that it can't be moved. And even the mortgage company won't be able to move it or sell it because of these liens all over them. And you're going to find this is where tax sales come in. So people will end up buying the debt from the house and servicing it and, trying to work it that way. But unfortunately, tax sales aren't always effective. And I won't go into the reason why on that case. I'm not an expert in tax sales, but this is something that I've learned in my investing journey, that unfortunately, this doesn't really take care of the problem. And often it really comes down to the liens are so excessive on the property. Now, this gets into a lot of politics. But you may even find even cases where the person doesn't even is not alive anymore; they're deceased, and the liens just keep accruing on the property. And you're almost like, well, just give them away then in that case. But unfortunately, it doesn't really work like that. And maybe in another video, I'll go into depth on why that's the case. So, as far as the second big reason, we're going to talk about the ARV. Which is the after repair value, is less than the cost to actually renovate. So in a lot of these houses, they're in such poor condition that they have like practically vegetation growing inside of the house. The roofs are completely caved in. It's all burnt up. It needs to be completely torn down. Well, if you were to put all of that money into the house, it might be like $100,000. It might be even more than that. But, for the most part, we'll stay within that kind of region. It would just take a lot of money in order to get it back to its true, a livable state. And the problem with this is when you have rows and rows of vacants, that means the values of the houses are reflective of what people have been purchasing them at, which is generally extremely low value. So you can throw $100,000 into a property and the property's only worth like $20,000. Well, now that doesn't make any sense. You can't sell it because you're selling it at a loss. You also can't refi out of it because banks only accept, they'll only let you refi up to 70 to 75% of the value, depending. And so therefore, you'd refi for $70,000. Once again, you'd be at a loss. So when the after repair value is so much less than the actual amount you had to spend to repair it, it's just not going to work. No investor could possibly even afford to do that. It's basically charity at that point. So that becomes a problem. The other issue is, unfortunately, in these type of areas where you have lots and lots of these houses, the existing landlords in those areas generally aren't encouraged to take care of the properties. So in a lot of the higher end neighborhoods, you have landlords who take care of the properties. They start putting in, granite countertops. They start putting in nicer decks and taking care of their lawns. And so all of you together end up keeping all the values high and ends up encouraging, really warm and friendly tenants. It ends up encouraging a lot of prosperity. When in these areas, the landlords aren't encouraged to do anything nice, and therefore it keeps the values low. So if you as an investor manage to find a house that actually for some reason, after only a limited number of repairs, you manage to keep it under the after repair value of the house, well, now these areas struggle, and the landlords around you who help basically dictate your market rents, they dictate your market values, they're not really helping you with the situation. Whereas like I said, in the prosperous areas, they're all helping each other. So the final challenge of this is the tenants. So the quality of tenant that you're going to get is going to be very poor. And so when we talk about quality, we're not talking about necessarily money. That's not really where this comes in. You may have heard of the class system where you get a class B, D, C, A tenant. We're not going to go into that really specifically, but when we talk about a class of tenant, we're often talking about really, in a sense, more of a culture, and not necessarily like a Baltimore culture, but it's more like the relationship between the tenant and the landlord. Oftentimes when we say someone is a poor quality tenant, it means often they're going to pay their rent. They're going to have constant financial struggles. It's going to be month after month you wondering even if they're going to honor the relationship, if they're going to even take care of the property, if they're just going to ruin it and leave, if they're going to just do drugs in it, start doing illegal trades out of it, which in Baltimore City is a very reasonable fear. Unfortunately, it does have a massive drug market there. So, this is what we would call a poor quality tenant. So you're going to have to imagine that even after you renovate, if you manage to get your after repair value, even if you manage to make a profit out of it, you still can't up your rents. You still have to deal with an area that is very, very downtrodden that the other landlords are not assisting with. And then you have to deal with a tenant who may not even pay you. So this can become multiple levels of challenging. And so what really needs to happen in these cases, I'm not an economist or a politician or anything, but what you will see happening is Baltimore City is demolishing or promising to demolish large sections of vacants. They're just wiping out the homes. That way developers can come and start building on top of these areas. But what it does do is it pushes the people out of those areas. So the people who are in those areas tend to keep them that way. So like, let's say you get a whole team of investors and they all decided, you know what, let's all together renovate this entire row of houses. Well, the issue with that is you still have those poor quality tenants in that area. And so generally need to kind of like be pushed out. So this obviously being known as gentrification, obviously a kind of a sore subject if you are not familiar with how this happens or how you actually improve the lives of those who are being, I guess you can say, gentrified. Generally, the theory is behind it is as they're pushed into other areas, they start to interact, I guess you can say, with whom you could regard as a high quality tenant. And then they start interacting with other neighborhoods, and theoretically, the culture behind it shifts. This is all theory, and I'm not going to go, like I said, I'm not a politician. I don't know 100% if that actually works, but that's the whole idea behind it. But that's the reason you don't just see a bunch of guys essentially they would have to do that, but really you just have to kind of knock this whole area down. So what you're often going to find is the investors will try to find vacant houses or, torn down, rundown properties in what we call the path of progress. So the path of progress is essentially, it's an up-and-coming neighborhood, but the borders of it are still have dilapidated structures and, some work needs to be done. So they'll pick up those. And the reason why is because people want to live in those neighborhoods. You already get high quality tenants in those neighborhoods. You already have landlords who care about the properties in those neighborhoods. And so when you start to kind of keep creeping out on the border, you start to ride that wave, so to speak, of the ARVs that are improving and increasing, and tenant rents and such. And the area is just a very good area. So that's oftentimes what investors will do. That's why they won't go into these harsher areas of Baltimore in the inner city and just suddenly start, picking up properties for cheap. So if you have any questions about that, let me know. Obviously, some of these subjects get a little bit harder, but obviously I'd love to keep talking about it, have the discussion. I'm still new to this whole investing journey. So if you guys have anything that, maybe some advice you guys have, maybe, a little bit of insight on a different perspective on why these properties stay vacant, I'd love to hear about it and talk about it on this channel. So please give a like and subscribe. I appreciate all the support, and I will talk to you all really soon.